Good evening, everyone. On the occasion of National Science Day, a very warm welcome to everyone on behalf of the Office of Dean Outreach and Alumni Affairs, IIT Kharagpur. As all of you are aware, every year during 28th February, we celebrate National Science Day to mark the discovery of the Raman effort by Indian physicist Sir C.V. Raman on 28th February 1928. For his discovery, Sir C.V. Raman was awarded of the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1930. As a part of the National Science Day 2023, we have invited a few researchers who will be sharing their view on a very interesting topic, science and religion. This will be followed by a panel discussion, again on one of the very engrossing topic, which is the religion of a scientist. We will begin with the lighting of the lamp ceremony, and I will like to invite on stage our Deputy Director, Professor Amit Patro, Professor Raja Shekhar, Professor Amitava Dotto, Professor Shashwat Chakraborty, Professor Joy Sen, Professor Manush Kumar Mondol, Professor Shudeshna Sarkar, and Professor Arjun Mukherjee for kindly lighting the lamp. Thank you, dignitaries. Thank you. I now request Dean Student Affairs and Officiating Dean Outreach and Alumni Affairs, Professor Shashwat Chakraborty, to say a few words on the significance of this event.
Let me try from the distance. Respected Professor Patro, our Deputy Director, the dignitaries on the dais, and other participants and dignitaries in the audience. Very good evening to all of you. It's a pleasant moment for me to say a few words on this occasion, which is so dear to all of us really, because it is on this day, on 28th of February, we as a nation probably contributed something in the form of a scientific development to the world. And as I understand, a major reason why we should celebrate it every year is to convey the message to our youngsters that we, the Indians, are actually capable of creating wonders in the domain of science and technology, even when the support facilities are not up to our expectations. In fact, that has been the story of many of the Indian scientists in the last century. Now, with what we have been seeing probably is not only a significant progress in the domain of science, because we are seeing and using many of the outcomes and fallouts of very significant developments in the domain of technology as well. So probably it is easier to talk about some contribution from the technology domain or from the science domain. But if we just briefly remember those days when Professor Raman had to work, and like a few others, I'm not naming all of them really. In fact, this kind of demarcation between science and technology was not there. And I'd like to remind our youngsters that, well, probably we are going towards a future where again this kind of demarcation between science and technology is probably not going to be so prominent as it is today. I wish personally that, well, we work together in the domain of technology strongly based on science. And I would expect young researchers to remember this, embrace knowledge, methods, procedures from both science as well as technology, and then contribute to greater cause of the mankind. I thank all of you for taking your time out and participating in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I now request our respected Deputy Director, Professor Amit Patru, to address the audience.
Good afternoon, the dignitaries on the dais, the faculty members, and the students and others in the audience. The Science Day, as Professor Chakraborty just now mentioned, has a lot of significance for our country, because while on one hand ours is not a country where we have to tell the young students or their parents to encourage them to go into science. All kids of the country, they always prefer science, because that is what is supposed to give them a career. And so at the initial schooling stage they talk about science, and as soon as they get a chance they go to technology, engineering, medicine, and of course management. But the science is a kind of pathway for them to reach their career goals. So while there are many countries where the kids have to be really coaxed into learning science, in our country it's actually the other way. In fact, we have to we find very rarely that kids actually want to learn, take up literature, art, and other branches of studies, commerce and so on. While all of them could be having, they could be getting an opportunity to excel and build up an excellent career. So although that is there, the first preference is always science, technology, medicine, and then other things come. And also, as I said, after using science as a medium of vehicle, they actually abandon science. I'm talking about the masses. I'm not saying those dedicated scientists. They of course they have chosen it as a profession, and they do it and they have to do it. But the vast majority, I think we just give a lip service to science that way, and that may be the reason why eventually at various levels, I don't want to identify a particular segment of the society, but I think all segments of the society we still feel that yeah, science is a good vehicle to reach certain goals, but after that it has no more use. So I think we should use the science day to do some deep thinking on this matter, and also examine whether just by celebrating a science day, just like many other days like uh, the Valentine's Day, whether it serves any purpose. So while that is one aspect of it, coming to today's theme, I think it is a very sort of deep theme, and I was talking to Professor Chakraborty as we were coming to the auditorium that well, it's going to be a challenge for the speakers to really talk about firstly that the first one is still safe. The topic is science and religion. That's fine. Science, though we understand science has its place and religion has its place, so they can talk of them separately, and if they can find something, that's up to them. But the second part, the panel discussion, I think is going to be more troublesome for the speakers, because you have to talk about the religion of a scientist. So you can't really escape that. You can't separate science from religion and religion from science. You have to take it as a whole and then see the discuss the interrelations between them, and and then deal with it. So it will be exciting to see how they handle. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay the whole time period, but I understand it's getting recorded, so we'll get a chance to look at it afterwards. So let me conclude with my own take on the theme of the topic today: science and religion, or science in religion, or religion of science, whatever way we would like to take it. I mean, it is not a I've not really done deep studies on either of those topics. By profession also, I'm not a real scientist. I'm more of a engineer or a technologist, or even that way a bookish one. I've hardly practiced anything in the field, so I really have very limited knowledge. But I mean, it is just by an observation, a couple of observations that I have based on two persons. One, I'm sure everybody will accept that he is a great and true scientist. Another one whom I think we really don't associate with religion per se, but his writings have been all about deep religious thoughts, and who was a humanist actually. So the two persons, one is Sir Albert Einstein. He was a scientist, and the other person is Rabindranath Tagore. Now, when we really study their lives and really know how they actually say, I mean, they have actually shared a lot of treatises. Like Einstein has written a lot of papers, and finally he had developed theories, and for which he became quite acclaimed. But at the end of towards when he was reaching his, I mean, when he crossed his prime and reaching his last days, I think he drew a lot of parallel between science and religion. So I think once you really go very deep down into even science or whatever it is, I think you reach a level where you discover you know that ultimately you have to depend on some faith, right? So science talks about measurements, validation, nothing on faith, right? Even if you will not accept that 2 plus 2 is 4 unless you really take 2 pebbles and 2 pebbles from another side and make them, and then again count, and if it comes to be 4, then you will be sure, okay, 2 plus 2 is 4. So science actually needs you to teaches you, trains you to validate your thoughts based on that. But there are times, as Professor Chakraborty also mentioned, that there were no instruments when even Sir C.V. Raman, when he discovered the Raman effect. So the instruments were not there. So the scientists at those times, they had to develop, they have to build their own instruments, and have faith, that will work. It is not that we buy a mass spectrograph from somewhere from the USA at the cost of several crores of rupees, and which is again validated and all that. So others have already backed it up. But real science, when you are at the frontier, there is nobody else to back you up. So ultimately, the only person who backs you up is yourself. and you have not done it before. So that is where faith comes. And the other name of faith is religion. The religion is also based on faith. So when you really overcome your, when you really you are through your entire strength, all the support system that you get from the rest of the world, and if you have to still move on, right? You have to move on based on faith, and that is probably where the scientists and Tagore and Einstein also had deep discussions on this topic, and they had exchange of letters and so on, and so that is where those two people connected. So if they really connected, so there must be some interlink between science and religion. So I leave it to the rest of the speakers today to delve deeply into that and come up with some illumination on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We are having one of the distinguished researchers, Professor Amitabh Datta, with us today as a guest speaker. Professor Datta is a retired professor at Jadavpur University. He is a fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering, West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology, and International Society of Energy, Environment and Sustainability. I would like to invite Professor Amitabh Datta for his speech.
Good evening, everybody. I thank the Dean of Outreach Activities for organizing this very timely program in which science and religion is the main theme. Now, I will use this very... Can you hear me? I will use the very brief time slot allotted to me to discuss a very important but truncated area of science and religion, and you will see what I mean. Now I will limit myself to two different views of science and religion which is prevalent in the present world. One is, of course, religion and science are complementary. You see the list of names, I could add many more. Two very famous Nobel laureate physicists and two people who primarily belonged to the sphere of religion but thought also about science quite a bit. The second view is Can you hear me now? So the second view is religion and science are irreconcilable. Now, this is, according to Einstein, this mainly comes from the fact that there are certain statements in religion which are not compatible with scientific views, and hence they don't match. So I believe what our important task is to enhance the complementarity, that is, science understands more religion, and reconciliation, that is, we work together to work out the reconciliation between science and religion. And let me talk first about the complementarity. And it is pretty obvious that science is restricted to what is happening in nature, what is happening in the material world, and to find out the laws, which is very important. And see, religion is the basis of ethics. That is the primordial ethics. Ethics in the ancient India or the rest of the world actually came from religion. So they were not exactly ethics as we understand it today, but it came from religion. As Einstein said, in fact, that the initial religion was religion of fear. People is worried about natural activities which they don't understand. And the second was, it was the moral religion. Slowly morality was instilled in human society. Now some people may ask that, why you are so much worried about ethical values? I mean, after all, we are all learning from school and college and this and that. And the answer was given by Einstein himself, and he simply pointed out that probably these were experiences he acquired during the Nazi rule, that a society which does not respect ethical values cannot continue for a long time. Forget about studying religion or studying science. The society simply perish. And as you can all see, during the Nazi rule, there was falsehood, Goebbelsian. Can you see the pointer? Well, somehow my eyes are not powerful. Anyway, so see, there were Goebbelsian falsehood. There were brown shirts and Nazis and all, and they were indulging in defamation. Einstein himself was defamed many, many times. Fraud and murder. And the rule, the Nazi rule, perished roughly after a little less than 15 years or so. So Einstein said that forget about various details. If you don't have ethical values, then your civilization will collapse. However, there is a conflict also, and that happens when one tries to enter the sphere of the other. Religion tries to enter the sphere of science. You all recall the fight of church with Darwinism or Copernican theory of heliocentric universe. That's a calamity. However, it is also true that when when science tries to take a value judgment on its own, this is a calamity, and this can be illustrated with a very important topic of contemporary interest, and that is, just think of the environmental calamity. So here I will take help of the Pope, and he has reminded us that we often talk about the environment problem, but that is not the only problem that science can tackle. The point is, how did it arise? Because we all became very greedy. We all started running after money. You remember the recent incidents in Joshimot, and it is now clear that there was unbridled greed for money. There was science without any moral or ethical guidance, and this is how it happens. So we have to take into account both, and I remind you that there was a time when a deep meaning regarding the interaction between nature and human beings came, and as you can see right here, that says that after all, tree helps every animal. You cannot think of a single animal who is not helped by tree in some way or the other. Of course, according to the modern scientific understanding, at least the tree absorbs carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So we have to take care of the trees, but it was not a theoretical discussion. There was a great emperor and who set examples in his rule, where he planted trees on both sides of the road, but also developed a model for maintenance to enhance the sustainability of the trees because of a collaboration between his government and the common people. That is why the whole thing takes. So in a word, we will say that basic teaching was live in harmony with nature, otherwise you cannot survive. Well, probably Rabindranath was one of the most famous examples in India. That is why he built up the Shantiniketan, where students started learning in close proximity with nature. Unfortunately, we forgot all that in no time, and why we? I mean, the whole world forgot it. And that is why the calamity came. Now, after talking about the ethical part, but we have to remember that many conventional religions have themes which are unethical, which are superstitious, against science, and these are observed in almost all religion. You cannot think of a single religion which does not have a part which is superstitious. So the real issue is how to remove these black spots from religion, make science understand the ethics of religion, and bring them close together. That is the main task today. Now, for this, of course, we have to illustrate with examples. There are so many such things. So I will use two only, that how religion is, not religion, misuse of religion is contaminating our life, our civilization. And I will talk about a debate many years ago between Meghnad Saha and Anil Baran Rai, who was a scholar from Pondicherry. Now, what triggered the debate? Now, Saha raised a point, and he said that there had been no connection between the hands and the brain. Now, what Saha meant is, in ancient India, there was too many speculative thinking. Now, to support them, you need experiments, you need working hands. And they didn't have working hands, simply because of the fact that the working hands belonged to the lower class, and they were not allowed to associate with the experimental side of the. Also, Professor P.C. Roy talked about more or less the same thing. Now, this thing that there is only speculative thinking but no practical work, now this is something which contaminated the intellectual sphere of ancient India. Now, Professor Anil Baran Rai, who was a scholar, he was a scholar in Pondicherry. He is famous for his interviews on various opinions of Aurobindo, but he was not familiar with the scientific method, and he made a very loose statement that the 10 reincarnations in Hindu mythology points towards the same evolutionary process, by which means evolution depicted by Darwin. Now, if you look into the list, you will immediately find that the similarity was very, very superficial. See, mushroom that came from the water, fine. Kurmo was an amphibian. However, evolution doesn't tell that there is a direct jump from Matsur to Kurmo. I mean, there are lots of intermediate states, and which people had to decipher by rigorous research, working with fossils and many other techniques. So this was a very loose statement, and Anil Baron Rai never mentioned any experimental basis of Darwin's theory. It didn't come from thin air. There was a solid experimental endeavor to set up Darwin's theory. Now, in the parlance of cricket, this simply means that Anil Baron Rai offered a dolly catch, and Meghnad Saha didn't miss the opportunity to grab it and hit back. And Meghnad Saha simply said that the whole theory of evolution was based on well-proved, observed facts, rigorous research by the scientists with the fossils, and therefore comparing it with Darwin's theory of evolution was an extremely loose statement. However, we must remember that Anil Baron Rai didn't do it for any personal benefit, for anything. I mean, he had some kind of patriotic feeling, and he made a loose statement out of that patriotic feeling. However, if we go back to more recent times, we will see a repetition of Anil Baron's statement, and that is under a completely different circumstances. And what is that? Well, in a meeting of Indian Science Congress, a qualified chemist and also the Vice Chancellor, ex-Vice Chancellor of an university, just repeated Anil Baron's argument and said that Lord Vishnu's Dashavata gives a better theory of evolution than Darwin. Now, what the hell? You can compare two theories and call one better if it is better supported by scientific data. If there is no scientific data, you just cannot make this statement. This is too irresponsible. However, there are more things to watch at. The first one is he was a professional scientist. So Anil Baron was not a scientist and he didn't know about the data. He should understand the importance of data before making a statement on the scientific basis of an ancient Indian theory of Dash Avatar. Secondly, this unscientific statement was made in a platform which is provided by the government. It was delivered in Science Congress, one of the most important scientific meetings in Kolkata. And finally, what I think is even worse is this was never officially criticized, that one should not make. There were criticisms in the media, but there was no official criticism whatsoever which says that this kind of loose statements should not be made in the context of science. Now I go back to completely another topic, and this is, does God reward or punish His creatures? No matter which conventional religion you pick up, You will find that almost every religion is there. Do a puja, do a home, do a yajna, and God will reward him. Now, is it consistent with science? Absolutely not. Because the main task of science is to discover the laws which govern the whole universe, including the human beings. Now, if that is the case, how can God or anybody break the law and help a particular person? This idea is not compatible with science. So this is a total incompatibility between science and religion. So I will draw your attention to a particular fact, that it is indeed from Bhagavad Gita where you see a statement which is closer to science, closer to the fact that one did not expect reward from the God. And you all know it, it is the famous Karma Yoga, and which says that thy right is to work only. So it is sort of cuts out the expectation of a reward from God at the source. The religious book you are saying is that don't expect for a reward. Just work and remain in a balanced mode between success and failure. Take both of them on the own. Now this, I believe, to the best of my knowledge, is one place where a major, again I am only talking about Karma Yoga, there are other things which I will criticize later, but this is the Karma Yoga, and which is very close to the scientific tenet that God cannot reward or punish. It simply says that don't expect for God reward and punish. Unfortunately, Gita doesn't do it consistently, because at some point they even criticize the Vedas. Now you all know that the Vedas are all about rituals, yajnas, and you ask for rain, you ask for sun, you ask for power, and it is full of expectations of reward from God. Gita criticizes it. It says that you do it only if you are unwise, if you are befooled by the tenets of the Vedas. Now, very unfortunately, however, the whole Gita is not consistent with it, and you see one of the slokas here, and he says that when you leave the earth, is it a feedback from the mobile? Huh? I think that is a better idea. And he says that he gets emancipation. Remember, emancipation is the greatest that you can get in Indian religion. You just pray to Krishna, think of Krishna, and you will be emancipated. You don't have to suffer through a rebirth. You don't have to go to the Shvarga or the Naraka. Now this is clearly pointing to a reward by the God as an exchange of sincere prayer from somebody. Now this is something which is the problem, that although Gita talks about a theory, a moral teaching of the highest order, in another part of it, now so the question is, what I see is that there is indeed prospect of moral and ethical teaching from religion, unfortunately, the parts of the religion are contaminated by various ideas. So what can be done? Now I can stop at this moment because I have exhausted 20 minutes. What I can propose, if the moderator agrees, that this what can be done is also an important part of the religion of a scientist. And can I pick it up for 5 minutes in the panel discussion? Then I don't have to overstep the time allotted by me. Thank you very much for patiently listening to me, and I am looking forward to important questions from my learned audience. This, I believe, is the most important part of this session.
Hello. Sorry. So, I expected others to ask questions really. Just to encourage that, let me ask a question, maybe a very silly one. Sir, I mean, what I'm just feeling, I'm not an expert really, but what I'm feeling is that...
Nor am I. I am not an expert.
Okay, that's great, sir. That gives me courage.
I was a physicist.
Right.
That's all.
So, it seems over last more than 50 years, the focus and the associated research on human brain,
Yes.
okay, is increasing tremendously. At one end, we are all aware that okay, we are talking about AI, artificial intelligence, deep learning, etc. But how our brain works also has been a very important topic of understanding. My question is, I mean, if I am correct in my observation really, my question is it that when you understand our brain and its functionalities more and more, purely following scientific approach, that may provide a better pathway for marriage between so-called religion, the uncontaminated portion of religion, and science? Thank you, sir.
Well, sir, I would simply say that this again, see, whenever you deal with these things, artificial intelligence you can use for spying, you can use for destroying another nation. So it all depends on, and this is where religion comes in. If religion instills the better moral and ethical values, you will simply use it for betterment of humanity. See, artificial intelligence does not work on itself. It works on the people who are using it. And if people are using it for mischievous purpose, the result will be something. If people are using it for the benefit of, see, I was reading in some other day that artificial intelligence has now reached at such a level that probably many jobs will be lost. This is a stark reality. Now, if people who are using it think of the people and used it in a moderate way so that nobody loses the job, but it helps humanity, that will be a great thing. See, sometimes we have to do mundane work. If artificial intelligence rescues us from that, it is also very similar to the environmental calamity. See, it was all science, but then people became too much greedy. I will just give you a recent example. See, when the environmental calamity was appreciated, I mean, it was for the last 30 years basically. Paris Conference or before that, Rio de Janeiro or some such. Obama ordered, made laws that offshore drillings in several coasts of America will be restricted, sometimes banned. But what happened due to politics? There was the industrial lobby, there was the oil lobby, and ultimately Trump banned the rulings given by Obama. Fortunately, Trump didn't last long. I don't know, this probably is something like Einstein's prophetic thinking that if something is completely divorced from moral and ethical values, it cannot last long. So Trump didn't last long, but it is gone now. But you see, it is again the, what should I say, I mean, it is again a case of greed, a case of hankering for money by the industrialists and so on, which led to a completely misapplication of science. So artificial intelligence is the same thing. It depends on how you use it.
So, am I audible? Professor Datta, I must immensely thank you for this talk in a way that I find at least one, pardon me? Yeah. So, after a long time, actually, I am hearing someone who is at least making some open inquiries about the scriptures or about, like, for example, you bring in a thing that you say that, well, these are the certain things which could be criticized. I believe that without open inquiries, things will not progress, and that's exactly where my thought process also match. And without elaborating much on my point to waste time, I would ask you, because you are pretty much older than me, how would you look for a religion-free world?
Sorry?
A world without any religion. So will it affect science? To me, it will not.
Well,
because
I think, yeah, please.
Because religion must have come much after the human civilization, and it would possibly look as ephemeral, and it might, with time, it might even vanish. So how you look at a religion-free world and how science to progress, and will it be a better things for science to progress, or will it will hinder the progress of science?
Well, see, the first thing, this will be discussed explicitly. If I get 5 minutes in the panel discussion, I will discuss it explicitly. But let me quote a simple thing which was said by a scientist who fought against the church but recommended reading of Bible in London schools. And he said, see, he was Darwin's bulldog and who supported Darwin's fight against the church wholeheartedly. And what did Darwin's bulldog say? He said, don't sink the ship because there are cockroaches in it. Religions have certain cockroaches, namely the superstitions and so on, for which one tend to think of a religion-free world. But then you will lose also the moral and ethical basis we can get from the framework of the religion, and the approach should be that remove the superstitions, remove the anti-human aspects from religion, and live happily with religion, free from black spots, and science, both shaking hands with each other. I think I will motivate this more if I get 5 minutes. But if I ask there are many people who actually debate that ethics has not necessarily come from religion. Ethics is something which has come before. No, let me tell you again that religion is certainly one source of ethics, Now let me give you a 1-minute example. See, Khudiram and Bhagat Singh, both were great sons of Bharat Mata. Khudiram's patriotism was inspired by religion. It is explicitly proved when he went to the gallows, he held the Gita close together. And he, not only Khudiram, but many of the Bengal revolutionaries were inspired by the religious textbook Gita. And I believe it was mostly Karma Yoga, the ideal of doing selfless work. Bhagat Singh was also a great son of, and Bhagat Singh himself declared that I am an atheist. So what I am trying to say is religion cannot be the only source. The advantage is all kids, according to tradition, learn some religion or has to go through some religious practice. Now instead of just doing meaningless rituals and so on, if you try to instill the moral and ethical values from religion, it would be better because most of the kids read it anyway.
Hello, sir. Sir, here. Sir, in your last slide, you talked about removing unscientific and unethical thoughts from religious text. Since the science evolves continuously, earlier we knew that there were only certain few elements, but now we are discovering new elements, right? But how will you define unscientific and unethical? Because it is continuously evolving, and in the future
This precisely will be my point if I get that 5 minutes. I will specifically talk about this.
What if in the future we get to know that maybe there exists afterlife?
I cannot mention any future because this is a completely new movement. What I will speak is that 3 completely different personalities, they are suggesting that there should be an effort to eliminate the unscientific and unholy aspects from religion. Now this cannot be done in one day, this cannot be done in a definite finite period of time, but there is nothing which says that this cannot be done. I will tell you that where a scientist says that you have to read Bible because it has value in it. I will tell you about a very devoted Hindu who says that all the sermons in Gita cannot be accepted, and he gave the reason for it. And I will tell you about the social activist who said that you have to clean your religion if you want to achieve anything in the sphere of social activity. So there are 3 completely different people, but they are suggesting the same path. I will try to elaborate on it. Well, you see, what you call spiritualism, I am just using a different language. I am saying that it is moral and ethical values. Religion is one source, they can come from other sources, but again I said the importance of religion is anyway the kids learn at a very early age, and instead of all those hanky-panky meaningless rituals and this and that, if you instill a little bit of moral and ethical values that you have derived from religion through the eternity, it will be much more useful. That's all I want to say.
तो एक संदेश आपकी तरफ से क्या मिल सकता है कि क्या विज्ञान का कोई धर्म है, एक बात, या धर्म में कोई विज्ञान है?
No, I am sorry. I was talking about complementarity between religion and science. Complementarity doesn't mean that religion and science are the same. They complement each other because science does not tell you much about value judgment. Like I gave you the concrete example that the environmental crisis, I mean, that is driven by science actually, because science did not have any moral or ethical guidance of how to lead the development. That led to disaster almost next door to us, Joshimath. And people have now agreed that because of unchecked development, which was application of science and technology, they have destroyed the whole climate, they have destroyed the whole environment there. So here science was without guidance of any principle which thinks about humanity. So science and religion are not the same thing, but they complement each other. There is a very nice quotation from Einstein which says that science without religion is blind. Religion without science is lame. The meaning is science, when enters into the development phase, it is driven by greed of various people, it is driven by greed of the industrialists, it is driven by greed of everybody. There is no guiding principle how the development should be, not for a particular section of the people, but for the humanity as a whole. And religion can say that this is due to greedy human beings, but it cannot correct it. It will need science if you try to rectify the problems which are destroying the environment. But religion is lame. Religion itself cannot do anything for that. So therefore, a complete understanding is needed. I think I have already taken much more than 10 minutes, so it is better. And since the next speaker will use some slides, with his permission, I go to the audience so that I can see the slides better. আমার ওটা আছে, সিঁড়িটা ধরারটা আছে, ওটা হলে কোনো একটা প্রবলেম নেই।
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to invite Professor Joy Sen from Architecture and Regional Planning Department for his address.
Does it change? Okay, some problem with technology which is between science and religion. So I think we are really enthralled and taken aback by very simple, very straightforward and very candid deliberation which came from Professor Datta. And he ended with a wonderful quotation from Sir Albert Einstein, and I heard the quotation going both ways. I mean, science
without religion is lame and religion without science is blind. Some people say the other way. Science without religion is blind and religion without science is lame. I think we need to learn from which one did Einstein originally say. There is a debate itself. Yeah. There are two different quotations. Okay. So this is something which Professor Chakraborty was trying to point out. For some reason he is not here. Compared to the first speech, what I'll try and share with you are some evidence from history, from the dynamics of history, which is over time, space, and the progress of humanity. It's not a linear progress. It has come up, it has gone down, it has come up, it has gone down. It had dark ages, it had Renaissance, then it again had dark ages. The history of Greece itself had different phases, so it is always like that. So it shows that history and progress has always been subjected to changes, transformation, adjustments of different definitions of science and religion in different times of the history of human civilization itself. If you read a wonderful book written by Professor Will Durant and his wife Ariel Durant, it's a 9-volume book which is called The Story of Civilization. Will Durant has explained this in a very articulate way. So what you see here is a man of science in whose name we celebrate the National Science Day, a man who changed the face of science for our nation, and towards the end of his life he received the Bharat Ratna, and he was actually tutored in an organization called the Association of the Cultivation of Science, which was in Kolkata, which was actually run by Dr. Mohendralal Sarkar, who was actually a direct or an indirect disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who is a man of just not religion but spirituality. At the same time, Professor Raman was an atheist as far as religion is considered to be a ritual, but he was also a follower of Advaita Vedanta, which he has said in his life. And when it came to a national decision on scientific policy, which was without values and it was committing a number of mistakes, he smashed the medal that was awarded to him for his Bharat Ratna. So that shows what kind of person he was. So he took the right steps for the right things, and he took the right steps also for the wrong things, taking the right decisions against the wrong things, whether it is science or whether it is religion. So that's the clarity of a person, and that clarity can come to you when there's something deeper going inside you. So I'm not going to talk about science, I'm going to talk a little bit about deep science. And I'm not going to talk about religion, I'm going to talk about a bit of deep religion, which is spirituality, which Prashant or Professor Dotto was trying to expound through a very small question. And the 1981 Nobel Prize in Physiology by Sir Roger Sperry on the two sides of the brain had sparked a debate and also brought it to a close, showing that there is a portion of the human mind, largely or broadly on the left, which is more inclined towards linear, logical, rational, reductionist thinking. It means that this is a rostrum, that is a stage, and those are chairs. And if I just say all these are part of an auditorium, I go to the other end, the right hand side, which is like it's more holistic. Now somebody will definitely say the rostrum, the stage and the chair is a part of the auditorium. The parts are contained within the whole, but somebody would say I am not concerned about the auditorium, I am saying the rostrum is behaving well or the rostrum is defective in design. So this is a reductionist view which normally science takes, and you express that through technology. But finally when someone says I came to this auditorium and it was such a brilliant lecture by Professor Dotto and there were some brilliant questions and the auditorium was vibrating, even though there was an audience less than 100, in an institute of 16,000 students and a totality of about 22,000 at the current level of statistics. So even the sample is a very small scientific sample survey, but the standard deviation in this hall was not that much, because everybody reacted very well to the speech by Professor Datta. So the auditorium behaved very well, even though the sampling survey, the sample size was very small. So I'm more on the right side, where I take the whole, I look at the whole raga of a music, I look at the whole Gita, which Professor Datta was looking at, I look at the whole history of Christianity, and suddenly I don't pick up a sentence by St. Paul or St. John, or I pick up one thing from there and I come to a conclusion. I take up the whole gamut and the spectrum of the whole non-linear thinking of the sum of histories. This is Richard Feynman. So what Richard Feynman said, the sum of histories is more important than histories itself. And that's why he got his Nobel Prize. That's the Feynman paradigm. And he worked with John Wheeler in quantum physics to take physics out of its reductionist level to a more non-reductionist, what we call quantum physics today. And I think with the 2022 Nobel Prize going to quantum physics, a large part of science is about to shake hands with some footfalls of extended or deep religion, which we call spirituality, which is my last slide. So let's move on. I want to decompose this talk into something. I wish there's some more younger students in this auditorium. So it goes like this. Essentially, when I say this is a rostrum, that's the chair, and that's the stage, and that's the proscenium, I reduce myself to some composing. I decompose from the whole auditorium into small things, because I have to design a rostrum, I have to design a chair. I cannot suddenly design an auditorium without designing the chair and finding out the dimension which will fit into the overall auditorium. So that's the detailing of the parts, which is taken care broadly by science and in detail by technology. But what happens when I bring a rostrum with a chair and the proscenium and the space in between? I start composing the whole, which is the auditorium. I get vectors, I get definitions, I get directions. That's called semantics. So in language, also in science, also in music, there is a running body of syntax and semantics. But there is something more than syntax and semantics, because one day in this auditorium we may have a good function, another day in this auditorium we may not have that good a function. There's nothing like a bad function, nothing like a very good function. We normally have a lesser good function to a greater good function. There's no black and white about it. So there was one function where it went very well, and there was another function, perhaps my speech today, which did not go very well. So that is the whole range. That is the whole range of what you call the distribution of values, the distribution of normative attributes to assessing a function. And there you get out of semantics and you border on something which is less discussed in the body of science, and there science has a huge shortcoming and deficit, which is semiotics, which is values, which is semiotics. So I'll explain a little bit. This is a very enlightened crowd. So when I have the composition of a language like A and then I add AE, doesn't mean anything, but when I put a AP in it, a consonant between two vowels, I get APE, which looks like a pre-human form. And when I keep on doing that, I may arrive at a word like APPLE. So if I just skip APP, maybe I need an application. So when I combine the syntax, I get different vectors or directions and meanings, which is semantics. And let's pick on this word, which is apple. When it's apple, I just simply mean a fruit, which is this apple. But when I take the next image, it means something more than an apple. It talks about an organization which runs with an image of an apple, but that's not the whole apple. It's an apple which is cut. Somebody has eaten the apple. That takes us to the third apple, which is the apple in the Garden of Eden. Some mythical apple, which the first man, Adam, and Hawa, which is Eve, had taken to begin the story of human civilization. It's all mythical, but Dr. Radhakrishnan says myth is an approximation to truth. If myth is not there, then you cannot have hard truth. Without myth, truth does not stand. Without truth, myth has no meaning. So these are some of the clarities that we need when we're having a dialogue between science and religion. So what happens? The apple becomes three different things at three different levels. And when you go to the next slide, there's something which is called the Adam's apple. And when you go to modern biology or physiology, this is what is called the Adam's apple. And nobody knows what exactly is an Adam's apple. Even if you ask the most modern doctor, they will say it has come down from Greece. And what it says that over the Adam apple you have the brain, and below the Adam apple you don't have the brain, you have the rest of the body. So the Adam's apple keeps the connection between the brain and the rest of the body. But when you look at the next image, which is here, which is a little mythical, a little abstraction, and this is not science, then you have a slightly bigger definition of what is an Adam's apple. This is an image of a Shiva. Probably he exists, probably he does not exist. But he had used his Adam's apple to contain the issues and the problems of the society so that he could convert the weaknesses to strengths and the threats to opportunity. So Shiva is actually the modern god of the SWOT, what we call management, management. And he creates an Adam's apple, which is so important. And these ideas are used in modern movies like the Avatar, Avatar 1, Avatar 2, which is James Cameron. So this is, what I'm trying to show is that values are just not values of or ethics, but the values in the way you perceive, the way you handle. You, in a little child, you may see the future of a great-grandfather of a family. So these are extended values. So values are just not values by the sense what you mean by values. It's a complete evaluation. So syntax, semantics, and semiotics. So this is how, if you put it in a tree form, what you call a dendrogram in statistics, you can decompose the whole tree into something which is syntax, A, B, C, D, any ABCs of any design. But when you start composing them, you get an app or you get an apple. You come to semantics. And science mostly stops there. Science mostly stops there. But there is a deeper science. There's a deeper science, which is spirituality, which is also deep religion, that takes you to the level of semiotics. And I think by now, many of you in this auditorium know what exactly I'm talking about. The previous slide, the last two slides, were talking about that. So this was actually explained by the true brain split theory. So what's happening, if I turn the brain in a vertical form, the left-hand side of the brain is more interested in the syntactical portion of the design of the universe. The laws of nature as governed by syntax. Whereas the upper portion of the brain, the right-hand side, looks at the laws of nature as governed by semiotics. But both sides mind it are the laws of nature. So the deep religious scriptures gives the laws of nature as governed by the semiotics. The shallow scriptures of science, by shallow I am not using the word shallow in the mundane term, the surface, the observation on surface. So when physics is on surface, it's physics. When physics becomes deep, it becomes quantum physics. Yeah, so you can take that, you may not be taking that also. So that's the whole level. So the two levels of brain are taking the two explanation. So what happens, the linear form of looking at things is actually a reflection of a journey which is constantly happening between the bottom and the top, which is cyclic. So it is actually a deeper cycle which is constantly rotating somewhere in some deep science or deep religious realm, which when gets projected we see, oh, this is Meghnad Shaha and this is Anil Baran Roy. This is Albert Einstein, this is Rabindranath Tagore. The first group did not meet well, the second group met well. So, but they come together, but the best part is that between the line and the cycle are the curves, which is non-linear. So that's spiral. So much of geometrical science today, which is called semiotics, explain a still less defined, a still less explored connection between science and religion. There's a lot of research going on in the world right now. Some people are aware of it, some people are not aware of it. So the people who are not aware of it, if they make comments without being aware of it, that's really a problem. So we need to be knowing a much larger body of knowledge before we jump into conclusions of either finding the laws of complementarity between science and religion or the laws of rift between science and religion. I'll give you some straight examples. You know, there are about 6 plus 6, 12 of them. They're what you call today in the language of science polymaths. You know, I'll start with Plato. I mean, he was a sociologist. You know, he gave the first ideas of social science. You know, Republic, Democritus. They're all from Plato. You know, Timaeus, which is the concept of time. The word time comes from Plato's Timaeus. So they're all from Plato. You know, but Plato was also an Orphic sage, and he was also a cosmologist, and he was also a man of meditation. So was Hippodamus, who was a town planner. He used to go and measure, but he was also a philosopher and a man of religion. So was Pythagoras, who was extremely mathematical, one of the fathers of mean, median, and mode, and the various ratios and proportions. And at the same time, he used to run a society of meditative people. They are known as the Pythagoreans in the Eastern Mediterranean, mostly in Alexandria, Metapontus, what you call Anatolia, modern Turkey today. So he used to run all that. And then finally you come to a person called Leonardo Vinci. I mean, in his life, he used the both sides of the brain so well that he journeyed between meditation and mathematics, and from art to aerodynamics. He had everything on his palette. You know, he had everything. He was just not a polymath. Today, Vinci is earmarked as a Renaissance man. You know, he's like a prototype of a Renaissance man. So when you are using the both sides of the brain, people by joke or by seriousness say, "Yo, you are like Vinci." You know, I mean, you are trading on both. And of course, the father figure of Meghnad Shah, Devendra Mohan Bose, Satyendranath Bose, and everyone else, and that is Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose. I mean, he had bridged both the worlds. I don't have time to get into the details. And there are other people. I'll come to this person in the end. One is Pierre Chardin, who was a paleontologist, and he did some of the first archaeological excavations in India. He met Sri Aurobindo in Pondicherry. He was in the Yale, Cambridge, Narmada archaeological expedition of India in 1935 with Dr. Helmut Tara, and he had traced unexplained 20,000 BC advanced Paleolithic civilization in the Narmada Valley. But he was also a Jesuit priest, and he proposed a counter theory to Darwin. Compared to evolutionary mechanism, he called it teleological. So he was a teleologist. Then of course Kekule. I mean, everybody knows Kekule had both the sides. You know, his dream on the serpent eating its own tail led to the spark and the discovery of organic chemistry, but he was also a rationalist at the same time, and with him chemistry fast forwarded like anything. So was Isaac Newton, the father of the Newtonian mechanistic model. At the same time, he was a dedicated man of a different kind of a church, the Protestant church, against the Roman Catholic Church. He was a member of the Priory of the Sion, and he believed religion as a gospel of realization, not as rituals. And he believed in the lighted imagery of the Christ rather than a historic Christ which causes problem in history. That is Newton. Benjamin Franklin, I mean, he was one of the fathers of static electricity. At the same time, he was one of the first Protestant movers in North America. He was a Freemasonic, and he used the Indian concept of swastika in his earliest preachings in the United States of America. So if you see a movie which is called The National Treasure, if I'm not mistaken, Tom Hanks and others there acted, you can see his roles there. He's doing both the jobs, science and religion at the same time. And then you have Voltaire, who is the father of Enlightenment. Renaissance, the birth of modern science. He triggered everything, and he acknowledged that the beginnings of European civilization had its seed in the Orient, and especially India. And he acknowledged both the worlds, that of reductionist science and also its origin in holistic science, which was in the Orient. And finally, one man who is the foundation of Indian spirituality, from the Gita to the Buddhism to Jainism, whether it's Gnostic or agnostic, this is the man who shaped everything in India. Swami Vivekananda says, there is no philosophy in the world, from Buddha to Pythagoras, who is not influenced by Kapila. His ideas of explaining cosmology through numbers, Shankha, Shankha Tattva, the combination of numbers. So right in the heart, and half of Gita is Shankha Jog. Half of Gita is actually Shankha Jog. Half of Buddhism is Shankha Jog. Buddha was born in a city named in his name, Kapila Vastu, and so on and so on and so on. So there is a lot of story that we need to gather before we start making the final statements about science and religion. So let's move on. So these are a collection of Nobel laureates. This I have it in a book of mine, very recent, who has talked about a necessity, as Professor Datta wonderfully said, the complementarity, the right complementarity between the right science and the right religion, and get rid of the contamination that exists in the arrogance of science and in the darkness of religion. So these are the people, starting from Schrödinger to Heisenberg to Oppenheimer. I'm not talking about this person because I'm going to come to him. And then Charles Towns, who came to Bigyan Bhavan and gave a talk on science and religion, 1964. Dr. Warner Arbor and Arthur Schawlow. I think I am taking up a lot of time. And then another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Nobel laureates who has talked about a connection between science, deep science, and deep religion, which is spirituality. But no one came as close as 1966 Nobel laureate in chemistry, Professor Ilya Prigogine, who is the father of quantum chemistry. So just before getting his Nobel Prize, when he wrote his book on structure, stability, and fluctuations to explain quantum chemistry and the quantum reality of the deep world of science, he picked up an image of Indian spirituality, which is Natarajan, the balance of the left and right, the balance of Soma, Amrita, and fire, destruction and construction, the unity of opposites, something which Niels Bohr has also used in his coat of arms, in his book. And finally, this book was accepted by the Particle Physics Center at CERN, and in 2004, I think I should have had that image, Dr. Anil Kapotkar was invited by all the particle physicists of Europe to get a statue of Natarajan and get it installed in the courtyard of CERN in Switzerland, which is world's #1 center of particle physics. So all these people are not fools. They must have seen something somewhere, a correlationship between the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain. The two sides are not important. What is important is the totality, the human being itself. Science is not for science sake, religion is not for religion's sake. It's for humanity. It is for the human being. We have a portion of the analytical world, which is science, and the portion of the intuitive world, which is religion, or what we call deep religion, what Prashanta was talking about, Professor Datta. So this is a turning moment, and I think I have to pick up on time. This is 1893, when Swami Vivekananda was earmarked as the most powerful speaker in the Parliament of World Religions. It is very fascinating and astonishing to see that most of the people who flocked around him were not men of spirituality and religion. They were men of science. And one of them was Lord Kelvin. The other one was Professor Hermann Helmholtz, whose paper influenced Professor C.V. Raman to get his Nobel Prize. And the third scientist was Nikola Tesla. If you go to MIT, Barker Library, Cambridge, next to Harvard. You go to the 5th floor, Professor Sharka's son is there. I met him there. You'll see in that 5th floor of the Barker Library of MIT, there's only a bust of one scientist. That's Nikola Tesla. And the scientist of MIT has said, he is the man who has bridged the two worlds and he has saved us. So Tesla was extremely drawn towards Swami Vivekananda, and for the next 18 days, they were in constant dialogue. So we, in some capacity, has discovered most of these dialogues, and they are a beautiful interaction. So what Tesla said, Swamiji, what you are talking in terms of the vital principle of consciousness, which is prana, and akasha, which is space, is actually my equivalent of force and matter. So what you are saying from the point of view of Advaita Vedanta, I can deduce mathematically the same thing in my laws of physics. And what you are saying is the charge or the expanse of the individual prana as the cosmic prana, which is electricity, is my theory of electricity carrying the signals across the world. So about 120 years back, Tesla and Swamiji was actually discussing about wireless communication, WWW, World Wide Web. And this is the visible here. This is the diagram that you see where Swamiji drew this portion of the diagram in terms of prana and akasha, and Tesla draws the other diagram between force and matter. So at the lowest level of syntax, there's a huge amplitude like the pendulum. At the middle level of the pendulum, the amplitude decreases. Prana complements akasha, akasha complements prana. What is prana? That moves akasha. What is akasha? Which is moved by prana. What is force? Which moves matter. What is matter? That is moved by force. So Newton said force is equal to mass into acceleration. D'Alembert says force minus mass into acceleration is equal to 0. And so when that happens, force merges with akasha, matter, prana merges with akasha, and the amplitude resolves into 0, and the whole kinetic energy gets converted into potential energy. That means the disturbance in the universe gets concentrated in the omnipotence of a single energy field in the universe. So that's why Swamiji said every soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest it, make it kinetic, so that you go back to the original potency of your own self. So you see this is what is said, and this attracted the Western scientists. So we have to say, we have to see, and we have to feel what is being said and how it is interpreted. And it is based on what values and of understanding of science itself. So this dialogue continued, something which Professor Patra was saying in 1929 when Werner Heisenberg came all the way to Kolkata to meet Tagore. And he said, poet, we are doing it through machines and calculations, but you have just written that in your poetry. How is it possible? I mean, you have said, Shimar maje ashim to me. Within the finite, I can see the infinite. Within the seed, I can see the whole tree. Within the tree, I can see the next seed. And if I go in 2-3 cycles, I get the whole forest, thousands of trees. And this is the foundation of quantum physics. And you have said this again in your songs, but you don't have the machines, you don't have the maths like we have. So Tagore and Heisenberg in 1929 in Kolkata interacted for a day. And that dialogue is quoted in a book called Uncommon Wisdom by Dr. Fritjof Capra, who has also written 2 other famous books like The Tao of Physics and The Turning Point, which has sold more than 10 million copies all over the world. Unfortunately, the Indian scientific community is not that aware of it. We are still with that 16th, 17th century reductionist science of Kepler, Copernicus, and Isaac Newton. Yeah, we are not update. So we have a gap because we are always we have a phase difference like a cos theta function in wave mechanics. So that's a problem. And that really triggered the next dialogue which happened in 1930 in the house of Berlin. Einstein invited Tagore, and they finally more or less accepted each other, saying that actually there is no objective universe. The universe that we are seeing is a reflection of our subjective consciousness. Just imagine if I bring in 100 dogs, please don't mind if I bring in 100 dogs to this auditorium and ask you to leave. If I give the same lecture, does it have impact on the dogs? It doesn't have impact on the dogs. So there's a certain level of consciousness on which this talk, if it has any value, has an impact. So that means the impact of this talk is actually subjectively dependent on the objective lecture of mine in the subjective consciousness of the receivers. That's participatory consciousness. And this is exactly what Tagore and Einstein had talked, the anthropic principle, something on which Stephen Hawking and Robert Penrose argued, and they agreed and disagreed. There has to be a portion of agreement and there has to be a portion of disagreement. That's always there. The two sides, the uncertainty and the certainty. And they finally, and there's a wonderful work now going in Helmholtz Institute in Bonn, which includes the principle of consciousness in quantum physics. So this goes on and on. So I have just fast forwarded. So this year we have come up with a small deliberation, which is the calendar. This is the last. So this is the last thing which has happened last year, which is the Nobel Prize which has gone to quantum physics. Something which was initiated by EPR, Einstein, Podolsky and Rosen, triggered by David Bohm, taken forward by John Wheeler and Richard Feynman, and finally discovered by Alan Aspect and his team last year in physics, a Nobel Prize, which says, which shows and which tells that the reality that we see as of now, like the rostrum that we see as of now, is based on two views. One is all the histories of rostrums that was designed previously, based on which the architect or the designer has designed this rostrum, plus the utility of this rostrum tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and day after tomorrow, and day after tomorrow. So in other words, the reality that you see now is a combination of a past function and a future function. So all that we call as present is actually a combination of present past, present future. It's like the intercept and the slope of a linear programming. The slope of the y is dependent on the value of the x, but the intercept of y is independent of x, which comes from a previous assumption. So that's why it's called the intercept. So if you start without the intercept, you have a lesser start. If you start with the intercept, you have a greater start. So if you start with values and deep realization, which is spirituality, which is just not values and ethics, it is recovery of the truth in the inner laboratory of mind, which is yoga, as against the external laboratory of mans and machines, which is outside. And this is exactly the dialogue between Tagore and Heisenberg, which is coded in the book. If you have any time, please get a copy. It's available on the Kindle and read the first chapter. And this is exactly what the Gita says in the 7th chapter. Sarva bhutastatmanam, sarva bhutani chatmani. Ikshate yoga juktatma, sarvatra samadarshana. That means something which contains everything on the one hand, and everything which is contained in something on the other hand. A juxtaposition and a simultaneity and a complementary of the two brings together ikshate yoga juktatma. Ikshan means the vision, parjavekshan, anubikshan, ikshan. Ikshate yoga juktatma, sarvatra samadarshana. And this is exactly what the Schrodinger's wave equation is doing. If you look closely at the wave equation, you'll find a complex number, which is a plus bi into a minus bi. And John Kramer, who has written this book on quantum handshake, he has dedicated 4 chapters. He's in the team of Alan Aspect. He said we had been using this equation for the last 80 years, but we never realized that the equation includes a portion of the function which travels against light, against time, and a portion of the function which travels for time. And the equation, the wave equation, is a combination of the past, future thing. So that means everything that we are seeing in this universe is a combination of the 3 armatures of time, the 3 armatures of the time. So we are seeing linear, but behind is a cyclic, and between the cyclic and the linear is a non-linear, which is spirals, curves, inflections, which we do in our statistics. So this is where I end. So this is a beautiful quotation in the Tao of Physics, and this is something which Capra says, that religion understand the roots of the Tao, not its branches, and scientists understand its branches and not its roots. Science does not need religion, and religion does not need science, but humanity needs both. Humanity needs both. Yeah, if you have one missing, it becomes lame or it becomes blind, or it becomes both. And this is what Heisenberg said, that it's probably true in the history of human thinking. The most fruitful developments take place at those points where two different points meet. If that's what is called transdisciplinary, just not interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary is the intersection between two circles, you know. But there's a portion of the circle A which is not interacting with the portion of the circle B. So by virtue of the union, if the remaining portion of this circle is working with the remaining portion of the other circle, that's called transdisciplinary. So the future of science and spirituality lies in transdisciplinary research, not in interdisciplinary research. That is something we need to realize, and the world is changing. Professor Doctor said there are new movements in the world and it's changing. So I'll end with two beautiful stories coming to the father of Kshatriya Rai. One is Obag Jolpan, and the other is a story that comes from the Avadut Gita. Everybody knows this story, but I'm just saying it to conclude this talk. I think I've taken up a lot of time. The first story says there's a man who is extremely thirsty, absolutely thirsty, and he comes to a lab and he asks for a glass of water. And then the scientist says, oh, you want a glass of water? Do you know how beautiful the water is? It has two things of the hydrogen and one thing of the oxygen. And he said, no, 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 वो तो बाद में होगा भाई. एक glass पानी मुझको दीजिए, बहुत तृष्णार्थ है. He said, Hare, I'm going to tell you, come to my room, come to my lab, see my research papers, see my rating, 7.9 impact factor, and the next one will be 13.5. He said, oh, to baad mein sunega, I want a glass of water. I want that value of that glass of water. I'm thirsty, give me a glass of water. So this goes on, and you know the story, So this is the clash between syntax of science and the semiotics of deep value systems, which is spirituality. But there's another story, I have to balance it. The other story is, there is a boat going on in the tempest in the ocean. And there's one person who is doing this, cybernetics, aerodynamics, or, Karnadhar, do karna ka lekar, the oarsman, he's doing like this. And there's another person who is sitting, his name is Professor Joyson, So he's saying, Are, aap kya kaam karte hai? Hum to Maji hu. Are, do you know Indian knowledge system? The Maji says, no, I don't know Indian knowledge system. Do you know quantum physics? He said, no, I don't know quantum physics. Have you heard the name of Werner Heisenberg, who met Rabindranath Tagore in 1929 in Kolkata? And then that Maji says, nahi, nahi, mera to kuch pata nahi hai. Aisa chalta hai. Are, you know nothing. Aap kuch nahi jante hai. You're doing shambles. You're nothing. You're good for nothing. Suddenly the weather changes, and there's a huge storm in the middle of the ocean. There's a huge storm in the middle of the ocean. And then this man is telling me, Are, kya hoga bhai? Kya hoga? Satyanash ho jayega, capsized ho jayega, and all those kind of things. Then the Maji says, Sir, can I ask you one simple question? Do you know swimming? So, with these two stories, I conclude my talk. This is a very learned audience, and we know that what we are discussing and what we are telling. Thank you so much. If there are any questions.
Thanks, Professor Sen, for this very engrossing, enlightening, and whatnot, this talk. I will not bring in any kind of a comment or any note of disagreement, but I will just ask you one question. You mentioned about arrogance of science. I just would like you to just tell me at least an example, as you can tell that what you mean by arrogance of science.
Yeah, I'll say it straight from the life of C.V. Raman. That's what I already said. I mean, there are hardly any scientists who are comparable to C.V. Raman, not only in getting a Nobel Prize, but the kind of life he used to lead and the kind of benevolence and charity he used to do. So he was very close with the National Planning Committee at that time, which was actually started by Professor Meghnad Shah, initiated by Subhash Chandra Bose and all that. And they're taking some decisions on the policies of science, and they are making some compromises. And they wanted to say and tell some of the things that India there has been hardly any progress in science. There was actually no scientific community. And then he had an exchange. You get into the details of it, his life. And then he just said, I think that's not true. Maybe the Western body has really expanded on science, but we had a history. And then the scientific body in Delhi, with under the patronage of somebody, I don't want to mention their name here, finally they became very arrogant. And they said, I think ye buddha ho gaya, he's losing his heart and brain. And because that time the progress of science in Delhi was dependent on foreign support systems and everything. You know what I mean, what I want to understand. And C.V. Raman was so shocked and so pained at the same time. He said, you're so arrogant, that's what he said. Because in the face of arrogance and in the face of opportunities, they forget what they are and what they inherit and what they're taking to the future. They've forgotten the intercept and also the slope. So this is the fate of the Indian scientific community. I give it straight from the life of the man in whose name we are celebrating today's National Science Day. I mean, please read the life of C.V. Raman and see how complete he was as a human being, of which science was a very major domain, but he had so many other things. He was so straightforward, so simple. I could have said some more things, but this is a public domain. I mean, I have to restrict. We can go out and have a cup of tea.
And deep
religion.
So we find this relation connection during BCE and also from maybe 14th, 15th centuries onwards, like
Leonardo Vinci,
yeah,
Christian Huygens,
1208,
Benjamin
like
Franklin.
this, Cambridge came and all.
Yeah.
Now, in between, I mean, for 1,000 or almost 1,200 years.
The Dark Ages.
Exactly. What was the connection between this deep science and deep?
Yeah, because it started with the.
And another, just.
Yeah,
just
sure.
one,
I'm sorry. I'm
yeah.
very sorry. I'm
So
arrogant. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Is it like because of this disconnection, many misconceptions have evolved in the later stages, and that also kept down the Indian science and Indian religion, the deep Indian science and deep Indian religion, compared to the Western deep religion and deep science?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a big question, and there are 2-3 domains of answers in it, and I cannot do that right now. I'll just try. What happened till about 470 AD, which is the beginning of the Dark Age, the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman Empire. East Europe had an extended scientific paradigm from Asia. The proto-fathers of the Greeks were people staying in Anatolia, the Hittites, the Milesians. Plato, Socrates are all from that lot. They are known as the Milesian philosophers. The Olympian science of Greece is a much later product. What happened? It was upturned by the Roman kings because they want to delink Asia from Europe. So I'll give you one example, which is the burning of the Library of Alexandria by Nero. That's why we have called a Nero's burning, that CD-ROM which we used to do about 15 years back, Nero's burning. So the whole purpose of certain upheavals in Eastern Europe at that point of time was to delink the original Eastern roots of Western science. This was re-acknowledged by a great historian, Will Durant, in his book, The Story of Civilization. So if you pick up the first book of his 9 volumes, the first volume, the name of that book is Our Oriental Heritage. He could have simply called it Oriental Heritage. He calls it Our Oriental Heritage. So he acknowledges in the book that all that is, we are talking in the West right now, has a heritage, has an origin, has a past, which is from the Orient. There's another person who did that, that's Voltaire, who is the father of European Renaissance. So what happened with Christianity, let no one with full namaste, the original Christianity was lost, and Christianity fell in the hands of the Roman Empire. In the same way, original preachings of Buddha was lost, and it fell into the hands of the emperors in India, and it became Buddhism. So as against you had Hinduism. There was no Hinduism and Buddhism before that. There was no isms. So this Christianity of the Roman Catholic Church became an instrument of propagating a certain idea of the beginning of science and humanity from 6000 BC, based on a syntactical interpretation of the Bible, 6000 BC, before which there was no humanity. This is something which you call the Usher Lightfoot chronology. Some of you are aware here, maybe all of you are aware of here. So it was an attempt by the Roman Catholic Church in association with the medieval people to limit some kind of a beginning of civilization as perceived by the Old Testament and fulfilled by the New Testament. That is the Dark Age, against which the Renaissance people, the Protestants, you can say loosely, first Martin Luther, Calvin, Christian Huygens, Isaac Newton, beginning with Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus, they all revolted. They are the various spokesmen. And the beauty is that they are talking about a science which is not, they are talking about a science which was not recognized in the Western definition of Roman Catholic science. So the religion against which Marx protested is his notion of the European version of religion. Are you getting me? Marx was not aware of Indian spirituality. He was not aware of yoga. Had he been aware, he would have withdrawn what he had written in his book. Are you getting me what I'm trying to say? Yeah. So he was aware of the European version of religion. So his Marxism was just justified, definitely justified up to that level of his interpretation of how religion had existed in Europe about 13th, 14th century till the Carolingian Empire of combined Germany and France, under great kings, So I'm not getting into the detail. So this was turned by the Renaissance, but Renaissance was not to Europe. Renaissance was to Italy, which was Europe was just born. Europe was born right after the fall of Granada. That's 1493. There was nothing in Europe before 1493. Till about 14th century, the only books of mathematics which were taught to the Europeans were the Arabic and the Latin converts of the Sulva Sutras and the Surya Siddhantas. And the ideas of 0 and 1, Dasam, which is decimal system, which is the whole foundation of the binary system. The Bakshali manuscript galvanized it later. It's totally, Bertrand Russell has a whole page on this, on his book, the Nobel laureate Bertrand Russell, the history of Western philosophy. And he says what we call as Arabic numerals and the number systems and the Dasam, the decimal systems, ought to be called the Indian systems of number, who gave us the knowledge of mathematics, which is also acknowledged by Albert Einstein. If Indians did not give us the idea of 0 and 1 and mathematics, we would have been far less advanced than what we are now, right now. So this is a micro history which was not included in the colonial interpretation of history, the kind of history books which are still being sold in our schools and colleges, which has a one-track Western eulogy of science and a very myopic, lopsided version of interpretation of Indian science as spirituality itself. I'm saying again, Indian science as spirituality itself, because religion in the definition of the West is an organized religion based on rituals. Religion in Indian ethos is being and becoming. It's ontologic. It's ontological. So when I believe in God, I become God. I become God-like. Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. By concentrating on the Brahman, I become Brahma Sarupa. So all our sages, from Agastya to Aurobindo, from Vashishta to Vivekananda, they have become God-like themselves. So we are not talking about a God in the temple or the mosque. We are talking about a God within, which takes us from the animal nature to the human nature, and from the human nature to the divine nature. So there is one kind of values at the animal nature, that's arrogant. There's one kind of value at the human nature, sympathy, and there's one kind of value at divine nature, which is altruism, philanthropy, and a cosmic embrace. Indian spirituality is mostly that. The problem is our scientific community has never been given this opening and clarity. So that's why you have a huge amplitude between our own heritage and our own ideas of science. That's the problem of Indian scientific community. But Western scientists are far more advanced. They are better benefactors and better appreciators of the origins of science in the Orient, especially in India. That's my take on it. Thank you. Any other questions? I think we are running pretty late and I have taken up a lot of time. Yeah. I've exploded, I've become arrogant and gone beyond the 20 minutes. Yeah. But you get a chance to say a few things, you normally don't get a chance. Even 3-4 people in an audience makes all the difference rather than 300 people without any focus and concentration. Yeah. So the number doesn't matter, it is always quality which matters. You know, one Einstein, one Feynman, one Kapila and one Vivekananda makes all the difference in the world, isn't it? They are the people who draws thousands of people. No. Please don't say that. Please don't say that. Yes, that's good. I think it's the amplitude between your lips and the microphone.
Yeah. So, Joyda, do you think that in today's date, economics is a more powerful religion which is driving the society, especially the consumer-driven society, and probably fueling the scientific developments? And do you see that economics is coming as a more powerful figure in driving religion, where religion and science is probably converging?
That's a very important question. I never thought somebody will ask that. So it started with people like Mahabul Haq, Muhammad Yunus, Amartya Sen. The element of values and ethics was added to economics. Before that, it was not there. Till the times of Paul Samuelson and Kenneth Arrow and all these people, economics was very positivistic and structured. So when Amartya Sen was getting a Nobel Prize, the MIT scientist said he brings ethics into economics. He brings values into economics. But that's one portion of the story. The other portion of the story is a new branch of science which is called ecological economics. Ecological economics, where we have an ecosystems of economic organization, where some group of multinationals in India are working closely with some group of multinationals in the Asia Pacific vis-a-vis something in Europe. So you develop ecologies of scale to define your economies of scale. You know what I mean? So I think you're in economics, so you know what I mean. So the demand and supply curves of economics also become the demand and supply of exchange of values, ethics, and even higher, more than that, even higher, which is the fine tunes of philanthropy, altruism, and embrace, the science of interconnectedness. Why should I give you 10,000 rupees? Just because the Bible has said, or the Quran has said, or Amartya Sen has said, or somebody has said, or Tata has, or Mahindra has said? No, because the reality in me is also the reality in you. The self in me is the self in you. So the self in me gives that extra 1,000 rupees to the self in you. So the knowledge of charity, altruism, venture philanthropy, or corporate socialism is driven by the self-knowledge. Are you getting it? That is the new branch of ecological economics. So this is a change which is happening to the world. Why should you do it if the Gita says or the Quran says? There has to be a reason behind it. You know? Yeah, Swami Vivekananda says, if you don't have a reason behind what you are doing, then you denounce religion. That religion I don't want. The old religion is to say, to believe in God is to be religious. The new religion says, to believe in yourself is to be religious. But this knowledge of self-knowledge was there in Vedanta, the Upanishads. Vedas are cosmological scriptures, but the summary of Vedas are in Vedanta, the Upanishads. And the climax of the Upanishads is Gita, which is the condense. So these clarities are important. So in institutes like IIT Kharagpur or Tata Institute of Social Sciences, we need these clarifications because we are having a disconnect among our students. We are calling ourselves Indians, but we are not aware of what we are, what heritage we have. We have very, piecemeal, disjointed interpretations here and there. So we need to know our things so well. Vedanta, the end of truth. Vedas are shrutis, they are vibrations. Some of them may be very high truth, some of them may be mediocre truth, some may be material truth. But how much of that truth is Ant, which is Vedant, that is Upanishads. So the climax of Indian spirituality are actually in the Vedantas, the Upanishads, like Shvetashvara Upanishad, like Chandogya Upanishad, like Isha Upanishad, the hundreds of Upanishads. But the problem is that we are not taught those, because there has been such an educational system created in our country, started by someone called Randolph Churchill. He was the father of Winston Churchill, and finally he was a working agent of Thomas Babington Macaulay, and he stopped all the gurukuls in India. He stopped all the gurukuls in India, and instead he got the missionaries. He could have done a beautiful job of merging the gurukuls with the missionaries, something which some group of Christianity has done in India, which are the Jesuit monks. This discovery of Indo-European language was actually done by the Jesuit monks. They had the guts to say that there is a similarity between Sanskrit words and all the European language. That's why Jara is geriatrics, Asthi is osteopathy, Padhatri is pediatrics, and Dwara is door, and Nasa is nose, and Hasta is hoist. Hundreds and hundreds of words. So the whole foundation of science is rooted in Sanskrit, and Professor Sharkar is there. And today the computer is increasingly recognizing. So Sanskrit is not a language, it's a system of language. So if you perfect English, it will eventually become Sanskrit. Are you getting it, what I'm trying to say? It's in the evolutionary rank of language systems. This is something which Panini had subtly talked about in his Ashtadhyayi, and he's there. But it was previously talked about by a person called Katyayani, Katyayani's commentary, prior to Panini. And prior to Katyayani, such commentaries are there in the Vedangas, the Shara Vedangas, which is the Chanda, the Jyotisha, and everything. But Jyotisha is not astrology, it is positional astronomy, which has an impact on the microcosm, human beings, and the cosmos. That's Jyotish in the Vedanga. So we need clarities, you cannot just say, "Are usme kya hai? Bade ki ache," and without reading the bed, you make such a comment. Please don't mind, I'm saying. And somebody asked that person who made such a comment, "Have you read the bed?" And he became so jittery. He said, "No, I need not read it." How can you make such a comment without going through the Vedas? Have you read it yourself? Then you have just said it from the secondary knowledge. Are you getting me what I'm trying to say? Without any disrespect to anybody. So in the name of science, you become most unscientific. Who is the man of science? He who is open to arguments, repetitive, recursive, iterative visits of checks and balances, and then only he'll come to a conclusion. Not predetermined, that whatever he says, I'll cut him down. That is unscientific, isn't it? Sorry if I've hurt anyone, but I had to be a little blatant, because this is a forum, and that's it. Thank you. I think we need to do the panel, because there will be no one in this auditorium for the panel. And I think we should not speak. We'll leave it to Professor Sharkar and Professor Mondal to speak. Otherwise, it's already 7:20. Thank you.
The panel discussion will be moderated by Professor Arjun Mukherjee. I would like to request Professor Mukherjee to proceed with the panel discussion, please.
Hello. you. We are running a little short on time, but the topic we have today for the panel discussion is, as pointed out by our Deputy Director, rather challenging and has the potential of having very interesting discussions. I would request our panelists to please come on stage and take your place. I would also request Professor Sen to join us. Sir, please. Hello. I welcome you all. I think that's better. You have already been introduced to two of our guest speakers, but in case we have people who've joined us late, it is my privilege to introduce them to you once again. We have Professor Amitabh Dotto. He completed his graduate education in mechanical engineering from Jadavpur University and his PhD from IIT Kharagpur. Dr. Dotto is a recipient of the Humboldt Fellowship in Germany. He's a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering, West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology, and International Society of Energy, Environment and Sustainability. You just heard Professor Joy Sen. He's a professor of the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning, IIT Kharagpur. He is the former head of that department as well as former head of the Ranbir and Chitra Gupta School of Infrastructure and Design. His areas of research are community and regional planning analysis and programming in architecture and planning related heritage studies and documentation. He has a long work experience with working with DFID and UNDP and IR3S. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Manoj Kumar Mondal. Dr. Mondal is a cognitive neuropsychologist. He specializes in development of assessment systems for recruitment, selection, allocation and training based on applied analysis of human behavior, psychometric testing and functional architecture of the brain. He has contributed immensely to Indian Armed Forces, elite paramilitary forces and to the academic institutions in human capital development. And we also have Professor Sudeshna Sarkar. She's a professor in computer science and engineering IIT Kharagpur and at the Center of Excellence in Artificial Intelligence. After completing her BTech in computer science from IIT Kharagpur, she went on to do her MS from University of California, Berkeley. She then returned to Kharagpur to obtain a PhD in computer science, and currently her research interests lie in the field of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and information retrieval. I welcome you all today to the panel discussion. The topic being the religion of a scientist. Now, we have had rather illuminating speeches right before this. I think it's important for us to clearly articulate what we think is religion and who is a scientist before we can go on to discuss the religion of a scientist. For today's purpose, just to initiate, if I look at the dictionary definition, a scientist is supposed to be a person who is studying or has expert knowledge of one or more of the natural or physical sciences. And what is science? It is a knowledge about the structure and behavior of the natural and physical world based on facts that you can prove, for example, by experiments. Let us look at science and scientists first. I would like Professor Shorkar to comment on this. Is this a good enough definition based on which we can have our discussion? Is this what you would understand a scientist to be?
Well, I accept the definition. So science deals with the study and the exploration of the natural and physical world. So there are different types of science. There is natural science, which deals with the understanding and discoveries related to the natural world, like the physical and the chemical sciences. There's social science, which deals with social and behavioral aspects. These are all empirical science. And then there is the formal science, such as mathematics, logic, theoretical computer science, which build formal systems and talk about their properties. And these formal sciences are sometimes used to have proofs of these natural sciences. And the formal sciences themselves come up with constructions which help to advance human civilization and whether we have robotics, artificial intelligence. Many of these come from formal science. So the interaction of these formal science and natural science is what we understand by science. In addition to that, we cannot ignore the role of application of science. So science is about the understanding of the world and of inventions which aid that understanding and take the knowledge forward. In addition to that, we have applications, for example, by engineers, technologists, medical professionals, etc., who apply science, and they should apply science for the service of society. So this is my definition of science.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, if I focus on part of the definition, which talks of based on facts that you can prove, and we've had interesting discussions before about the role of faith in science. What would Professor Mondal say about this? Would you agree that science may be limited to the idea of facts that you can prove, or is it more to it?
Yeah, now I get it. Well, I think I have to explain a little like a different way when you talk about facts and arguments. I think as a human system, as Professor Shorkar has just mentioned, we have physical sciences, life sciences, social sciences, and formal sciences. If you see the structure of the brain, since I belong to neuroscience as well, the brain can actually incorporate 60,000 input per second, and the brain absorbs roughly 30 to 40 per second in order to process the information through 3 trillion nerves and connections that we have in the brain. So what really happens when we try to understand fact? If 60,000 inputs are there per second, what really happens, we have to create a template for ourselves in order to gather some input which are of some relevance to me. So when input comes in formation, it becomes information. When information is processed, it becomes knowledge. When knowledge is utilized, it becomes experience. When experience is exercised, you understand truth. When you understand truth, you realize that truth lies behind the fact. When you realize that truth lies behind the fact, you develop wisdom. When you gain wisdom, you gain bliss. When you gain bliss, you ultimately understand the essence of religion, that how it actually binds. So fact and truth are two different things. What you say as science and religion, I guess what Professor Datta was saying was perfectly correct. We need to understand three things: the comparability amongst the sciences or disciplines, the compatibility amongst them, and the complementarity amongst them. So when we try to understand the compatibility between science and religion, it becomes apple and orange. Both are important. But the question is, in which way apple is important, in which way orange is important for us. So it's important to understand the complementarity rather than always going by the comparability and compatibility. Therefore, to my mind, the whole idea of making a difference between science and religion is not really necessary, because these are the two different ways of looking at things. What Professor Jayasen was telling about the left and right brain, if you have to look, if science says that mind is all about history of experience, and if mind scientists say that, well, science is all about useless reductionism, none of this hypothesis should be true in terms of truth or fact. We need to also understand the two sides of the brain also have got a connectivity called, it is called corpus callosum. It integrates. So quantum physics, if we talk about, if the molar and molecular sciences have to come together, they need to also understand the commissural fibers between the two vertebrae, which is corpus callosum. Oh, do I have to start once again?
No, that's the last.
Okay, okay. So what I wanted to tell that if there are two sides, I'm fine. If there are two sides of the brain, in fact, I have got two books on left and right brain. And there I mentioned about these things, that all integration takes place at the corpus callosum level. The left brain has a corpus of apple and the right brain has a corpus of orange. So I gave the evidence of people who have got reverse lateralization, those who have got right hemisphere as the dominant hemisphere. What did they do? So arguably, if we try to think science and religion like fact and truth, like apple and orange, it's important to understand they coexist, and they coexist peacefully. The essence of knowledge comes from there only. How peaceful are they? In order to understand both natural events and the supernatural events, we need to understand their compatibility, comparability, and complementarity, all three at one go. So I would refer two books. Of course, I haven't read them in full. One is about the God part of the brain. There is a book on Alistair McGraw, the God part of the brain. And the other book is Why God Will Never Go Away from Our Brain. That's by Alpert. Both are saying that, well, it is not understood whether God has created our brain wiring or our brain wiring is predisposed towards understanding God. Which way it is true? Probably it's the belief, and faith is equally important, because we have the science of belief as well as part of our system. Belief is equally important, and what Professor Datta was saying, that religion helps us in having certain beliefs that it should be done, it should not be done. That gives us the concept of ethics as well. If science is without ethics, then of course it's no science. If ethics is without having a scientific knowledge, it's probably that's also not true. That's the fundamental I want.
Thank you, sir. So we are again and again coming back to that realization that they have to complement each other. But, we came to the idea of God, and again, the dictionary says that religion is the belief in the existence of a god or gods and the activities that are connected with the worship of them, or in the teachings of a spiritual leader. And we had a very interesting question earlier about if we translate or rather transliterate these terms, if we think religion as dharma, is this the same? I would like to ask Professor Sen, would you agree that this is what religion is for today's discussion's understanding?
I think it was evident in Professor Datta was saying, about Einstein's, I think it was evident there. Einstein has a book called Ideas and Opinions. Ideas and Opinions, and he gives a very simple evolutionary sequence of religion. Religion, say, of a single man. Suppose I'm born into a family. The family is not rich. The family lives in a region which is underdeveloped, and the family is a part of a society which is an outlier of a much larger society. Suppose if these are the conditions, right from day one, and there is some kind of religion existing in that region, in that family. Just imagine a situation. So their religion begins with an element of apprehension, or what you call fear. Einstein calls it the religion of fear. And now this boy or that girl of that family develops a bit of credibility, gets some education, not formal, informal, vocational, and travels to another region, meets other families and sees other boys and girls, having similar or dissimilar or near similar experiences, and he finds out there are certain organizations, certain principles which are broadly working with a bit of variation in his village, in his family, and in another village, in another family. And so, in his village, he probably saw that the tree was worshipped with a particular form, in a particular form, and people were just going to the tree and giving some kind of an offering. But in the next village, he or she finds that the tree is just not a place of a worship, but it's also a community gathering. There's a bit of festivity which happens with a certain equinoctial or a solstice circle of the year and things on. He begins to identify what Einstein says the next level, the religion of nature. The religion of nature. Very simple, very straightforward. And then this boy and girl travels to a university, may not travel to a university, picks some books, develops an experience. This beautiful cause and chain definition that Professor Mondal was giving, starting from fact to truth, finally ending with bliss. Actually moving from Sat to Chit to Anand, and then finally discovering the beauty of the universe. The final thing is to not only reach bliss, but also the beauty of the universe. See beauty in everything. Even in disorder, even in dystopia, even in chaos, there's a bit of beauty. There may be a lot of beauty. So there, you start developing some kind of co-relationship or co-evolutionary relationship between this village, one boy, that village, one boy, and he starts seeing the general behind the specific, the truth behind the fact. That's probably Einstein has the two theories of relativity positioned that way. And he reaches a beautiful third level. Actually, there are two more levels, and Einstein says there it gets converted to a religion of love and care and empathy. And you start seeing those natural forces which were elementally the forces of fear, which became the natural forces. Now they are forces which are inducted in your life. You don't see those forces outside in the universe. You see them inside, and they become a part of you. So the question that you asked, it all depends at what level you are and who is interpreting them and for what reason, which can be kept on the book of records. But that cannot enter the Bible of science or religion and cannot become a statement on a wall. It needs to be verified, re-verified, reiterated. It has to be recursive. recursion is a very important thing, trying to see the small truth with the big truth. You see a flash in the sky, and you also see a little flash inside you. Like Kekule saw the benzene ring, and there was a little bit of flash. So you see that flashes are recursive patterns in the vast and also in the small. So flash is just not a dictionary word. It gives you a repertoire or some kind of an imperative of enlightenment. It remains as a spark. So you connect, and then the whole definition of the religion of fear, whatever the dictionary definition is, gets transformed. So actually the definition is not transforming. You are transforming. And you see the same world in a much better way. I'm quoting someone who is not scientific, but he's quoted by many scientists, that is Sri Ramakrishna. I'm just saying that. Sri Ramakrishna says, it's a beautiful statement, I like that very well. A very simple statement. He said, before you have the enlightenment, ei jagat hocche dhokar tati, dhoka. You are getting dhoka everywhere. And after enlightenment, this is mojar kuti. It becomes a sports, a play of delight. Before and after, purva and uttara. And this is a beautiful thing. So he talks about different stages of revelation. But we commit a bit of we create a bit of an issue because each one of us are in different stages of development and transformation. I'm also learning things every day and that kind of a thing. And probably next 3 years I'll change some of my older paradigms. So the statements should be flexible, the path should be unfolding, and the journeys should be infinite. That's science, and that is also spirituality.
If I may, sir, when we talk of religion, and that has been very clearly highlighted by Professor Dotto's presentation, the general idea is of this, God or gods, who, as he pointed out, many would say would, give you gifts or punish you. The dictionary also talks of God or gods and worship related to them. But correct me if I'm wrong, in the original teachings of the Buddha doesn't talk of any God. We have had Indian philosophical schools which are atheistic. We don't have a word called religion, but we do have a word called Dhamma, which is also there. So, is our understanding of religion today more about the existence of God and the worship of God, or are we trying to discuss the Dhamma of the scientists, which is just, if you could add a few words.
A little add on. Buddha was a very interesting personality in the history of humankind. He came at a particular time of Indian dark age. The Vedic age or whatever, if they had existed, had receded into the past. And the biggest crux or the problem at that time was morality and ethics. So talking about divinity, the spiritual level, was like talking about the 10th floor of a building where you have not yet entered the first floor of the building. I mean, even the material level is not that well organized. Forget the morality, the cultural and the ethical level. So he emphasized solely on the ethical principles of what we call dharayate iti dharma. What you bear, the bearing capacity. Dharayate iti dharma. So what you bear. So in this level you bear something. In this level the bearing capacity increases. In that level the bearing capacity increases. He knew that the average Indian mind at that point of time was even missing the basic linkages to proceed from the material to the moral. So the whole re-emphasis on the crux of the Jnana Kanda of the Vedic age was not important to him, but he emphasized the route to the Jnana Kanda, which was meditation and yoga. Yeah. That he did not avoid. In fact, his whole principle was more on the process rather than the goal. So he emphasized the process, which was meditation. Now today, by virtue of meditation, I may be believing in something. What is meditation? Meditation is an organization of your mind. And the more and more, monocholo niketone, the more and more you're organizing your mind, happier you're becoming, and the relationship between your internal world and the external world becomes better and better and better. You're self-organizing as you're organizing the universe as a vision. So Buddha emphasized on, that's why he said, right vision, right work, sammak karma, sammak this, the ashtanga, the 8 principles. So that was absolutely scientific. And suddenly if you talk about a God, the clarity of God was already missing in the Indian society then. So it'll introduce more chaos and clarity if Buddha was doing that. So he didn't say what he realized, he kept quiet. Osti nastir machkan, Buddham. But he emphasized on the second level, the intermediate level, which Professor Dotto was saying it again and again and again. That was the crux, the most important delivery of his lecture. That the possible bridge between science and religion, which is, I can be a great scientist, but if I'm unethical, it's all gone. I can be a great religious mohanto of a monastery, but at the end of the day, if I'm corrupted, if I'm carnal, I'm gone. You know what I mean? So it's ultimately ethics and morality which holds whether it's science or it's religion.
Thank you, sir. So it seems we are at a point where we see that the reductionist definitions, if I may say so, leave scope for understanding both science and religion beyond the common perceptions. But it opens up a lengthy debate. Without going into that right now, I would like to look at a different aspect. Why would we have religion or science? I would ask Professor Dotto, what do you think is the purpose of science? Why do scientists do so much science?
Well, I think the purpose of science at the abstract level is to understand the nature. The trouble is this will never happen. Whenever you unleash science on the nature, it will lead to technology. And once you go to technology, then it immediately comes the question of greed, money, and this is where you have some kind of moral, ethical, whatever you call it, which will keep science. Again, I would like to give the example of Obama and Trump. See, Obama shows some ethical values and saying that stop offshore drillings on the coasts of America because this is destroying, but that does not kill the greed and the hankering for money in the industrialist world. So as soon as Obama's rule is finished, in comes Trump, and again all those offshore drillings, they came back with vengeance. Now see, this is what I am trying to emphasize, that this does not die automatically. You have to have some movement which tries to keep your greed in check, which tries to rekindle moral and ethical values on you. Now religion could play this part. Also, I said that it is not necessarily religion. I mean, it can be ethical movement of science, of some form, which is there. But if that is totally extinguished from society, the ultimate end is disaster.
Thank you, sir. Now, carrying on from the idea that at least at the abstract level, science tries to understand the world, nature. If I posit the idea that as human beings, we have these questions: who we are, where are we from, why are we here, where do we go when we are not here, and while we are here, how should we conduct ourselves, what to do with the material world. Science does try to answer a lot of those questions, and I believe so does religion. So I ask Professor Shorka, would you say science is also like a religion insofar as it offers a narrative to human beings in understanding the world and doing what they want to do with it?
So in my mind, science has a particular purpose, and science tries to advance our understanding. And everybody has talked about the requirement of there being an ethical moral framework. So I believe that the ethical moral framework can come from religion, can come from other sources, but to me, a scientist must have a religion, which scientists may have a personal faith, personal religion, or may not have another conventional religion, but scientists must adhere to a religion which sets the ethical and moral fabric of how they must conduct themselves. In that religion, there must be certain core values which a scientist must adhere to. And the guiding principle, so guiding principle is service to humanity, protecting the earth, or any other, so when you want to be reconcile that, what is it that you are aiming for? Now, there are questions which belong to the material world. There are questions which some would say is spiritual. So to me, spirituality, I do not understand spirituality, but to me, it is about thinking beyond the self, only self-greed. It's thinking beyond self-greed, thinking about humanity, thinking about the earth, thinking about the society, and how we can further it. So it is quite possible to be a scientist, adhering, having the religion of a scientist, which may be, which may coexist peacefully with another religion or faith. The only thing that I would think a scientist's religion must do is that when you interpret science, so as Professor Dotto said, a scientist to coexist with religion must remove certain spots from the religion. So it is not the deficiency of the religion, it is based on the interpretation or taking things at face value which a religion has. So a religion cannot be a dead religion or dead set of rules or dead set of worship. It has to live in order to serve society, in order to serve the needs of humanity, for those who require a particular religion. So one has to be in peace on what they want to do, how they are connected to the larger society and the larger world, and how a particular person draws that inspiration, gets that faith, can come from different sources. It can be from the conventional, belief in a particular religion, maybe through other sources which, give them that succor. Everybody, we cannot be greedy and sustain even ourselves. Forget about harming the world. So we have to have a self-understanding so that we know that we have to be in harmony with nature, in harmony with society, and each of us can have a different source of values that guide ourselves to that. So to me, that is the essence of science, and I do not see any conflict with any faith or religion.
What I find very interesting is you said that a scientist may have a personal faith, but that is not what you're talking of, the religion of the scientist. When you're talking of religion, it's more like dharmo dharon korbe je, what holds all his scientific exercises and binds them with some moral ethical values. So this religion of the scientist is not necessarily about a faith in God or not, which they might or might not have,
yes,
which is a personal faith. Professor Mondor, what would you say about atheism? Would you say that is also a religion in that sense? Because it also helps us, a particular atheist, it might give him their worldview, and if we think dharma as giving something their worldview and tells them how to behave, would you say atheism is also a religion?
Well, these are certain questions. So you are actually testing my ignorance rather than knowledge. Uh, the point is that Einstein never says that he is atheist. He says that I'm agnostic. I'm a religious non-believer. So atheism is a way of life. And I think science is also a way of life. Religion is also a way of life.
Frame my question a bit. Would we say that even an atheist would still have, at least some kind of a dharma when he's practicing science?
Right. So the atheists are actually non-religious spiritualists. I would call them as non-religious spiritualists. And if the interest of faith is, that's also a kind of faith. Let me tell you, there is a book called The Biology of Belief, which tells that our gene expression takes place based on our faith. That is, our gene does not control everything. Based on your faith, your protein gets unfolded. And Bruce Lipton wrote that book. He's a famous molecular biologist. And he has shown that there are two different kinds of hormone actually work in our body. One is a growth hormone, other is a protection hormone. So protection hormone is very important because this, once again, we go back to the original state of creationism versus evolutionary process. Protectionism is important because fight and flight, that saves us. But when fight and flight, we get it through protection hormone, there is a chance for growth hormone as well to come forward. And growth hormone is actually the hormone for faith and belief. The hormone and faith and belief is understood today by functional MRI, the functional magnetic resonance imaging studies. The placebo works based on faith and belief. You have not been given aspirin, but your headache gone. The suggested potency of faith and belief is even more stronger than a pharmacological drug. So where from the essence of life is coming from is the faith and belief. So if atheism is my faith and belief, yes, there is no particular God, but I believe in power. So power is God to me. I think that's also a form of religion. That's a, you may call it as non-religious spiritualism. I fully view this atheism is also a way of life, although there are very few people, because most people are afraid of the frightening God rather than rewarding God. It has been found that patients who are actually believing about punitive God, they are dying early as compared to the people who believe that there is a rewarding God as well. So which kind of hormone is unfolding in your system, the growth or the protection? The more you protect yourself, more you kill your immune system. So faith, belief has also got a potentiality. And of course, science is all about argument. The religion of a scientist should be arguing. The religion of a strong believer is agreement. That you have never seen God, yet you believe like science. So belief and science, they can coexist very peacefully.
Just add a question. So would you say, in the millions of students in classrooms all across India who have absolute faith in the postulates of the science books without questioning them or doing personal experiments to prove or disprove them, having the curiosity to question the validity of those scientific postulates, are behaving in a scientific manner or behaving on faith like a religious person believing in science?
Well, what is the precise question then?
Science is about questioning.
Yes.
Again,
argument.
Right. But millions of students study science having absolute faith on what they're being told. They aren't really questioning it regularly to verify whether what is being told is actually the physical law of the world. So is science and religion, what comes from your saying, is a matter of not necessarily the content, but the approach, the aptitude towards it. So would you say that students of science, say even graduate students, are behaving like devoted religious people, or are they behaving like scientists?
Well, as I said, science, to become a scientist, it's a difference of mind versus mindset. It's a difference between purpose versus passion. It's a difference between agreeableness versus argumentativeness. So I think if a person is not asking the purpose behind a particular scientific truth, it's a lack of curiosity rather than I call it as something to relate with their aptitude. The attitude and aptitude also are a conflict, and our aptitude is more in the left brain, attitude is more in the right brain, because there are more fiber concentration in the right side, more cell concentration in the left side. So I think the fundamental of human existence is this dynamic interplay between the opposing motives of equal strength. If we have got only science, no religion, the other side will have no strength. So if I don't get medicine, I'll die. And if I'm having the religious side only, without having the scientific purpose behind it or the understanding behind it, the religion will not save me. Ultimately, I have to understand the peaceful coexistence between these two, how they can be harmonized. Brain created that organ, which is the corpus callosum, which is actually connecting between the two sides of the brain. And brain makes one side dominant, other side non-dominant for a particular function. If you do geometry, the right side of the brain will work better. If you do arithmetic, the left side of the brain would be doing better. But at the same time, the brain has got tremendous capacity to adjust even if they are in a very highly conflicting situation. Take for example the left-handers. The left-handers find everything in this world is disadvantageous because it's a right-fit world. Is everything, right from mouse to scissor to refrigerator door, everything is meant for right-hander. How do they survive? They survive because they learn through science how to innovate every day. Because they innovate every day, even though they do not have the aptitude for innovation, they become a better innovator. That's why we have found 30% of the talented people are left-hander. Only 5% of the total pool of talented people are right-hander. The reason is the attitude towards innovation is their faith, belief, and orientation and insight. They learn the process, not the destination. They understand the journey, not the target. So that understanding is the understanding of the religion of science. That's what I believe.
Sir, we are quite late today. So with the permission of the panelists, if Professor Datta would like to share on what to do, you had a...
Well, I think, bringing out the PowerPoint, etc.
Would you like to just talk about it? Yes, sir.
So, I mean, at the end of the lecture, see, the question was that we don't want to give up religion completely because it is one source of developing moral values, not the only source. But on the other hand, there are problems with religion because they are anti-science sometimes, what we call superstition, and which are also harmful further. So it's a question of deciding what to do, And here I want to tell very briefly the story of three talented people, all with different social standard, religious faith and everything. But let us what they say. The first one was Darwin's bulldog. I need not introduce it, but the fellow who fought against charge was made a member of the London Board of Schools, and the decision he had to take was whether Bible should be taught in the schools. Now everybody anticipated that probably he will throw the whole motion in the waste paper basket. He didn't, in fact. And he emphatically said that I won't do it because Bible still have lots of moral teaching. And of course there was an additional point which is not relevant for us, and also I am not in a position to appreciate it, but he said explicitly that the Bible has excellent language. And the same thing I have heard about Gita, no less than Bankim Chandra, who was a great Sanskrit scholar also, and he said that the Gita's language is excellent, super. So he simply said that let us retain Bible, but do a little bit of editing here and there, and let us keep it like that. The second person had a completely different background. He was a devoted Hindu, but he didn't lose his complete rationality, and very surprisingly he pointed out that the long-standing myth that Gita was directly from the mouth of Lord Krishna cannot be true. The logic is very simple. The logic is this, that the whole thing happened during a big war, and Gita has 18 chapters, and I don't know how many hundreds of slokas it also has. So Bankim said, using his rationality, that so there must be somebody else who read it by compiling Krishna's teaching here and there, and so it was not directly the Lord's statement. It was carrying the opinion of the people who wrote it. It was a kind of interpolation, somebody else. And this beautifully explains that there are some slokas in Gita which does not agree with the main spirit of Gita, the karma yoga, etc. So Bankim said that they have to be found out and edited. He was a devoted Hindu and he was saying that edit the main. The last one is Ambedkar, completely different, from a completely different sphere of life, and he was a social activist, of course a lawyer, a great scholar, etc., etc. But he said that in spite of the work by Gandhi and so on and so forth, and many other social workers, this will not go because the casteist philosophy is embedded in our religion. So if you want to get rid of it, at least tell people that these are the things, the one which supports the parts of the Hindu religion which talks about casteism is something which has to go. So I find that three different people with completely different educational background, religious belief and so on, they all said that the religious books has to be edited. They are not sacred. Now the question is how to do it. Who will build the cat? Obviously that's a new question. But what comes to my mind is, if three people like Darwin's bulldog, Bankim Chandra and Ambedkar sit together, they will reach an agreement. So this has to be come in a bigger sense, at a bigger scale. When that will happen, I don't know. So we have talked about secularism, we have talked about this and that, but we never talked about the black spots of religion, and something has to be done about it. And that, in my opinion, is diverse people who are honest, who are rational, may have different religious background. They should sit together, make a movement to free the religion from the black spot. Now this may be utopia, this may be something else, but three people who were brilliant in their own right recommended that edit the books of religion, try to make it more compatible with public welfare, compatible with society, with the, the development of society, etc. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, sir. So it's more like a coordinated reformation, and we have seen that religions do evolve over time. Right.
Who are brilliant in their own right, who are rational.
Thank you. With that, I think we would like to conclude our discussion. Would you like to have some closing comments? Any closing comments, sir?
First, I think we are very blessed to have someone like Professor Datta amidst us and give us, it's a combination. Like, I'm not talking about Darwin's bulldog or Bunkim Chandra Chattopadhyay, but Professor Datta comes from another quadrant of science and enters the gamut of IIT Kharagpur and adds values, adds directions and clarity to that. I think there we have gained a lot, but I don't think we have time for anything because everybody is just waiting. But there are some equivalent things also on the religious side. If you look at the half cousin of Charles Darwin, which is Francis Galton, and then his next generation, which is Carl Pearson, and then his stepson and educational, which is Ronald Fisher. They committed mistakes in the basic language of science, which is statistics, by using data which only came from racism. It came from the division of a particular race vis-a-vis the rest of the races in the world. And finally, when Ronald Fisher came to ISI Kolkata, met and gave a lecture, he acknowledged the great mistakes in the beginning of the fundamental vehicle of science, which is statistics itself, which was driven by eugenics, if I am right, biostatistics, which needs to be corrected and reshuffled and repositioned in the mainstream of science itself. So we have examples both sides. We need to be balanced.
Thank you, sir. And I thank the audience for being such a patient audience. With these words, I would like to hand over to the host. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for patiently listening to such an enlightening discussion which has elevated our scientific mind and spiritual thought. I now request Professor Rajashekhar, our former Dean Faculty of Science and a Senior Professor of the Department of Mathematics, to come on stage and kindly felicitate our speakers, panelists and moderator. Also requesting them to kindly come forward. Thank you. I will now request Professor Rajashekhar to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So it's my pleasure to propose vote of thanks. Before I do that, this is a nice platform where the topic is also very exciting, and the panelists did a wonderful job, and the speakers also enlightened. Apart from this, I think on these kind of science day, of course in this institute all of us do science every day. So these are the occasions where we can also communicate the essence of science to reach a wider audience. So maybe we will also initiate some open days, etc. Okay. So let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Amitava Datta, who is a learned scientist, all the way making to IIT Kharagpur, took the pain and travelled from Kolkata and spent the entire day here and enlightened us. So a big round of applause for Professor Amitava Datta. Then let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Joy Sen, who amongst us, but definitely a personality of various facets, and he is very highly talented, and his lecture is of superb quality, and we require another plane to reach and understand. That's what I felt. So once again, a big round of applause for Joy Sen. Then we have with us Professor Manas Mandal. He's a senior colleague with us since several years, contributing in various dimensions to the growth of the institute, and we thank him for sharing his thoughts on the panelists. Thank you very much. And we have with us Professor Sudeshna Sarkar, Senior Professor of Computer Science and Engineering, also held several positions in the institute and contributed to the development of the institute, and thank her for being on this panel. And we thank the institute administration, director and deputy director for giving this, and let me thank Professor Jayant Mukhopadhyay, who has initiated this, but unfortunately he is not here as a Dean Outreach, and also we should thank the acting Dean Outreach, Professor Shashwat Chakravarti, who was here at the beginning and who could not continue. And finally, we should thank the entire staff of alumni office, their outreach and alumni office. Every occasion they have been putting best efforts and then making all the events a grand success, and this is no exception. Of course, as Professor Joysen mentioned, not the quantity, but even 3 questions triggers from the sample size, I think it makes a big impact. So I feel that's what happened today. So definitely it's a grand success in that sense, and the video recording is available, so it will be available to the community for the benefit. Once again, thank one and all who are behind organizing this. Thank you very much.